All right, so as I said, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us at Satori for our latest installment in our series of webinars, although the first one for 2023. So we're very excited to be doing these again this year. The topic that we have chosen for to kick us off this year is really uncovering the hidden truth about your ERPs, and with a specific focus on the Procure-to-Pay function. So I suppose as per previous webinars, I'm joined by two of my colleagues. So I'm Mark Bookatz, look after our growth strategies. I'm joined by Troy Nicholson, who's one of our founders and director of our business development function, and Natalia Levenkova, who's our GM of customer success. Lots of experience in this particular space, and Procure-to-Pay really is the area that we probably cover most. So we have lots of war stories and interesting examples to share with you about the type of things that you should be looking for. So before I carry on, as I mentioned, as you can see, this is coming to you live. There has been some changes with Zoom, so if you do have any questions, and we really would love to get your questions during the session, please use the chat function that you'll find on the panel. Direct the questions to myself, Mark Bookatz. I will pick them up during the course of the webinar, and we do have time at the end to address them. Hopefully we can get to all of them and look forward to doing that. We also have a couple of polls, and we'll be dishing those out and discussing the results as they come in. All right, so let me kick off. I mean, why are we doing this, and why do we talk about this? Really, most organizations out there do use ERPs. Of course, it's an essential tool. We're not here to suggest for any purpose that that's not an essential part of your technology roadmap, but in reality, what we find is that they don't necessarily provide the ongoing protection and the kind of assurance against some of the typical things that we're seeing out there. So starting with just errors, oversights, and we'll talk a bit about the type of things that can creep into the P2P process. They don't necessarily always protect you against all manner of the different policies that you have and controls which could be breached. And you don't always know about those unless you're monitoring for them. Controls do fail. So even though some controls are implemented into these ERPs and in other spaces, we have seen these fails. We do see them overridden. You need to know when that happens, particularly in a process like P2P. So we'll be talking about that. And of course, fraud. Now, most fraud that takes place happens because people understand the layout of technologies like ERPs and how to get around some of those controls. What else could you be doing to prevent and detect that kind of activity? And finally, something that we also like to talk quite a bit about, and that is whenever you do have a change in your policy or any change in the organization, do your systems give you the capability to understand whether those changes have worked and whether they may have introduced additional gaps that you may need to close and introduce additional controls as a result of those policies. So as a result, you do need to think more about beyond the ERP around what you can do in this space. If we talk about fraud, what are the trends that we're seeing out there? The research has shown that on average, about 2.5% of annual spend for any organization in their P2P function is lost to fraud and errors. Now, for any of you joining us, and certainly for any of our customers, existing customers, we know your annual spend, your procurement spend will often be in the millions, several millions, if not more. So 2.5% of that often itself will be in the millions of dollars. It's not an area that can be neglected. It should be looked at continuously, and that's why we think it's important to discuss today. Procurement in itself as a function, of course, around all of fraud. The ACFE in its research in 2020 estimated that around all of reported fraud, 11% of that comes from the procurement function. So it is one of the highest categories where fraud is encountered. So it does deserve specific focus. And then finally, if we drill down into some specific processes within Procure-to-Pay, accounts payable, and just looking at invoices alone, the research certainly backed up by our own customers and what we see out there shows that about 2 to 5% of all invoices have errors. Now, what those errors are and what they could mean for you, well, that be some of what we will discuss today. But again, a significant number and something that you need to be aware of and mitigating against. So with that, I just wanted to share with you some of the things that we're seeing within some of our customers. Just picked out a few examples. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the important thing to note is that probably every single one of our customers has a mature ERP. They've got a good set of controls. They're already disciplined organizations, yet if you take the top example, one of our customers in the real estate space typically finds around $600,000 in duplicate payments in any given year. Now, that's against the backdrop of a ERP, but also they mandate POs for every single invoice. Or so they say. We'll talk a bit about that today as well. Nevertheless, strong control in place, stuff is still creeping through. Probably the last one that I'll mention is second from the bottom. One of the government entities we deal with, strong four-way match checking, again, very disciplined organization, and uncovered a particular large overpayment or miscalculation of around $3 million in one of the instances. They do pick up others in with smaller amounts. That particular one really highlighted the fact that the four-way match, as important a control that is, wasn't always picking things up, and hence some additional scrutiny and oversight is needed in this process. So with that, I might just start off with you, Troy, and I'll talk a bit about, I know that one of the areas that often creeps into the space is the fact that most organizations we deal with will have an ERP on the one side and potentially a procurement system like Ariba, Coupa on the other side. And whilst they perform important functions, things start creeping through. So
sure.
Maybe you can talk to us about that.
Yeah, so one of the trends I see out in the market is this, I guess, misunderstanding between system integration and synchronization. So most of our customers, a lot of our customers have a separate third-party procurement system. So they could be running Oracle as an ERP, and then they've got an Ariba or a Coupa as their procurement system. Some of our customers have one system like an Oracle with end-to-end, but there is most of our customers have a separate system. So there's a belief that they're integrated, so they must equal each other. Whereas so what it really is the two siloed databases, an ERP master file and then a procurement system master file. So just got some examples here from us. So what's the data telling us? So we've got an example here from a project we've done quite a while ago. I've changed the data in terms of company names, but it's essentially its concept. On the left-hand side, in the top row in the orange, you can see the procurement system vendor name. And on the right-hand side, you can see the ERP vendor name. And you can see in this example that we've got companies in the procurement system that are active, but they're inactive inside the ERP. So what's the problem with that? There's also some issues there around data quality, around the actual name of the vendors. They're not matching. But really the problem there is that there's traits inefficiencies. So now we've got potentially people in the organisation going out and procuring goods and services, and they're unable to pay the invoices because they're inactive in the ERP, which typically is where the invoices get paid. So what's the problem there is where it can create a lot of frustration in the business, inefficiencies, and also an opportunity to cut corners to get things paid quickly, because now the supplier's waiting to get paid and the details aren't updated in the system. So that's one issue that we found. You just want to carry on, Mark, to our second example?
Just wanted to ask you a bit about the company name mismatch one.
Yeah.
Just as an example, I mean, we do see that, and of course you can't always get it right, but what do you think some of the downstream consequences could be of just having the same company with different names?
We often see that, and what the big issue there is posting multiple invoices against different suppliers. So a supplier doesn't get paid, they contact accounts payable, they say, look up JB Excavation, the operator looks it up, they can't find it in the system, it's actually called JB Construction, send me the invoice again or repost it, or worse still, I create another purchase order for that good or service, and then that's almost impossible to track because now you've got two separate purchase orders for and what the computer thinks is a different product, when actually it's the same product.
Right. Yeah.
So this example here is showing me that we've actually got suppliers that are in the ERP system, but not in the procurement system. And the big issue here is that you could have people in the organisation circumventing purchase policy. So purchasing from these suppliers through the back door, there's no transparency, and there could be an issue there around collusion or just mistakes again. So there's a note there, Mark. Yeah.
Right. Got it. And I suppose again another question on that one would be, I mean, do you think this sort of opens the possibility for fraud? The ability to have some that are active within the ERP, but not even on the procurement.
Yeah, definitely. It's there's a number of issues there around procurement. It could be collusion. It could be people using their friends as suppliers. It could be missing out on purchasing opportunities. So you can notice in that example there, there's a number of plumbing and drainage suppliers. You may have a contract with a preferred supplier, so now you're missing out on preferred pricing.
Right.
Yeah. Last example here is, again, in this example, inside the procurement system, you'll see it's a vendor ID. Top one there, Star Trek is ending in 116. And on the other side of in the ERP, still the same vendor ID. However, it's a completely different ABN number. And it's different. In some examples, it's a completely different vendor name. So going back to my first example, there could be some errors. Again, posting poor quality of data, posting invoices against the wrong supplier.
Right. Yeah.
And so the next point is, so why does this happen? So big reason why it happens is that, again, we believe integrated systems have a two-way street. So if we go to my example, we've got a bucket of data sitting in our ERP system, the master data, a separate bucket, of course now we're using a separate third-party system for procurement. And we believe in our minds, integration means this. So it means that data inside the ERP system matches the procurement system. That's actually not the case. The way it does work 9 times out of 10, or almost 10 times out of 10, is that data is, the procurement system will pull data from the ERP system, one-way traffic. And as you will be aware, you've got a vendor master team or an AP team onboarding new suppliers, and then also updating vendor master files on a daily basis. So data is being updated inside the ERP. It's flowing through the procurement system. But on the procurement system, you can have users, people in the team members in the organisation making changes within the procurement system as well. So it depends how much the system's locked down, but we have seen a lot of examples where you thought that they couldn't update master file information, but they can do it. So the systems become out of sync fairly quickly.
Yeah, so the example you were showing earlier, clearly that's happening on both sides.
Yes, definitely. So the data was telling us actually in this example it was happening. There's also external factors such as a lot of our customers do data uploads, and what that means is, system upgrades. We often find that when you first implemented a solution, you believed controls were intact and operating, IT controls. However, when you go back years later, you realise that, or when you look at the data, or there's a mistake or there is a fraud, you realise that particular upgrade is broken to control. So it's just another external factor that can upset your integration there. Data. I mentioned data uploads. So some of our customers upload data through the back end of the system, which means that a lot of the front end controls are circumvented, or all of them are circumvented. So that can cause issues. And when you implement a system, typically implement the current policy and processes. As time moves on, people change, policies change, processes change, or are forgotten about or not followed, and then these systems don't become effective, or they can't be completely relied upon.
Okay, I mean, obviously lots of good examples and stuff to think about here. I think what we'll do is probably launch our first poll, and let me just get that going. And seeing that we are talking about the vendor master file. The first poll we just encourage you to answer is, how does your organization cleanse? How often do you cleanse your vendor master file? So hopefully it's not never. Is it once a day? Is it once a month? Once a year? I'll just give a few seconds for everybody to put in their answers, and then I'll close it, and then we'll quickly discuss the results and see if it sort of probably backs up some of our theories around, and you know, also backs up some of the experiences that we typically have. All right, let me close that. I know we don't have a lot of time, so let me end that and then share the results. Hopefully you can all see this on the screen. I'll just read it out in case Zoom is misbehaving. Some people say never. I hope that's not the case, but I suppose that might be the truth in some organization. I do, and then 47% say once a month, and another 47% say once a year. So fairly infrequently. Any thoughts on that, guys? I mean, you know, what's our experience in health when people do that?
I would say probably once a year.
Yeah.
Most of the people once, twice a year.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the we find that the job was allocated to someone to say do once a month, part of their process, and then that person moves on from the organisation or just forgets to do it. Christmas time, holidays. So then when they go and look at the data, it's actually a mess. Haven't been actually running those reports and doing them. So you are relying on people to do that for you.
Yeah, and I suppose it's never urgent. So
no.
You know, if there's a concerted effort to do it, maybe around a system migration, get some focus, but otherwise that's probably
that's the boring stuff.
Yeah, not particularly interesting to do daily. Okay, all right, that was really interesting. All right, so let me maybe turn to you, Natalia, and talk a bit about, you know, we spoke about the master data, we talked about the impacts of having, you know, asynchronized systems on that. If you talk about the process itself, and maybe specifically accounts payable as one of the processes within P2P, what are the kind of things that you typically see going wrong?
Yeah, so well-designed and well-implemented process around accounts payable would definitely have lots of controls. And I decided to have a look at this from the process point of view, what kind of stages each invoice is going through and what kind of pitfalls we see at each step where these controls are failing for our customers. So I'm going to use a few examples. So normally the first step is invoice receipt. And it seems to be very simple and straightforward, but even at this stage, we might have some potential issues. So typically, organizations receive invoices in electronic or physical format. It becomes rare, but still happening. And it can be done via email or through a supplier or vendor portal. And what we see might happen because the invoice processing takes time sometimes to go through all the steps, which we will talk about a bit later. Vendors become impatient, they're not getting the invoices paid, they might send another invoice. And because they are so far apart in time, sometimes it just gets processed again. So the next step is to actually enter your invoice into your ERP system, and it can be done again in multiple ways. Sometimes, rarely, it might be a manual data entry, or it might be uploaded overnight if you're receiving invoices in batches, or if you, for example, receive it, if your portal is not integrated with your ERP, you might need to upload them, or they might go directly from the portal or from your scanning system. And one of the very typical examples we see is that the information from the invoice is captured incorrectly.
Right. And what kind of information, I mean, do we typically see?
Yeah, so it might be both vendor details captured incorrectly or invoice details, such as, for example, invoice number might not be scanned or entered correctly. And what happens then when vendor is checking on the invoice, why it's not paid, someone start looking up the invoice and cannot find it because, for example, the scanning system recognized the invoice number 123 as L23. So it's a very typical, like we see it all the time. And the same with typos, transpose numbers and things like that, or characters in the invoice number. Plus, might pick up wrong date from the invoice, for example, the due date instead of the invoice date. So it all causes some issues with the processing the invoice later.
And what are some of the downstream impacts that you're seeing from that? I mean, when people are getting that stuff and mistakes happen.
So in most of cases that would be a potential duplication in invoices, and you might pay it multiple times, and or it might be overpayments, underpayments if the invoice amount or GST amount is captured incorrectly. And on top of that, again, that might be missing information. For example, purchase order number is not entered, or it's not linked to the purchase order in the system, or one of the probably the most severe issues I saw happen to one of our customers where they had automated uploads into SAP happening every night. And to do that, they either switch off the controls or the front-end controls are simply not working for the uploads. And something went wrong and they uploaded the same file 4 times. So it was discovered in the morning and they did a huge cleanup. And it took them very long time. I don't know, for some reason they couldn't revert it, so they had to clean up it manually. And 2 years later, we implemented a project around accounts payable, and we found that there were still traces of this upload, and there were some invoices paid twice or even more times. So that was very severe example. The next thing I want to talk about is the approval process. That's actually my favorite part of this process. I know sounds very nerdy, but I believe that the approval process is a very, very good control because it lets you to pick up all these potential duplicate or incorrectly processed invoices which slept through the previous controls. What happens is that the person who is approving the invoice, sometimes they are in a rush because they know that the invoice has to be paid soon because the vendor's chasing them. And what people do, they cut corners, they approve something without following all the checks. And in most of cases, we see people doing it just because they want to get the job done. But sometimes it also can be done intentionally. People see this loophole and might do something.
Yeah, I was about to say, there was a very famous for Queensland audience, you may remember, very famous case in Queensland and with Queensland Health, quite a big fraud. And one of the middle management in finance convinced everybody he was a Tahitian prince. So he used to have a black Amex card and he used to have big parties at the local nightclub and invite all his workmates. And what he was doing was going to the AP team at 4:30, 4:45 on a Friday afternoon, and saying that there's been an error and you need to pay this grant payment of $3 million straight away. And of course they trusted him and he bought them drinks. So he would get those processed into his own bank account. So he stole 16 million, I think was the end number he stole. And he only got caught because the last transaction he tried to push through was $11 million. So he went.
Someone actually checked it.
Someone checked 11 million was pushing it a bit, but went on for quite a few years, Queensland Health, and eventually he got caught and sent to jail. And I believe that he actually wasn't Tahitian, he was New Zealand. So he got deported a couple of years back up. He got released from prison back to New Zealand. So that's an extreme example, but it's just a good example of what can go wrong.
It would obviously slipping through the system all the time until he got greedy, and then
he
got greedy, he was a bit smarter, that would have just carried on.
Eventually,
absolutely. And so thanks for this amazing example. So the next step is 3 or 4 way matching, and people rely on that a lot. The problem with that, the potential problems with this process is that, first of all, it's very time consuming because you need to match your purchase order against your invoice, against your receiving report. You need to reach out to multiple people in the company, get their feedback. Very time consuming. People trying to automate this process to make it easier, but what normally happens, they still see the mismatches and they need to investigate it manually. And what people tend to do, they exclude, say, low value invoices from this process, recurring invoices. So some things can still slip through that. Again, the issue with the purchase orders, I know everyone is saying that we have a purchase order for every single invoice, excluding these type of invoices.
Yeah.
So that's very typical. And also sometimes invoices just coming from different sources. For example, you might get something from the supplier portal, something from the scanning system. They might have their own controls and they're not matched, like these 2 lots not matched to each other. So you might still have a duplication in this way. And the last one is the actual payment and what might happen here. Even, like we talked about potentially paying the same invoice submitted at different times. But one of the good examples also happened 2 or 3 years ago, I think at the beginning of COVID, when people pushing their luck and trying to do something fraudulent. One of our customers had received a few invoices with the incorrect bank account on the invoice, and it wasn't matched back to the vendor data. And they paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to this fraudulent bank account. So that's what might typically happen at this point.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Natalia. I think we have the second and last poll, which I'll launch now as well. And really what this one is about, in line with what Natalia was talking about, hand on heart, be honest, we're not obviously collating these results and we don't know who said what, but what percentage would you find of your company would you actually, percentage of your payments actually do have POs, despite the best efforts? If you can let us know what you typically would expect. I think everybody would like to see 100%. Is it 80 to 100%, which is still probably quite good? Or is it 50 to 80, or maybe even less than 50%? Be honest, we're just trying to get some good data on this. I think we have our own intuition based on our information. In fact, more than intuition, we have the data to know what it is. I'll give it a few seconds and then we'll just talk about the results. All right, looks like they're all in. So let me end that poll and share the results. All right, so we have 7% saying 100%. Well, that's I think that's good. It's most people don't have the confidence to think that everything is
the trust in people.
Yeah,
Actually, funnily enough, I know for sure one company where they really have 100% purchase orders raised for the invoices, which is amazing. Maybe that's
there are a few people on this one, but the bulk of them, 43% at 80 to 100. What's interesting is 21%. So 1 in 5 organizations or people on this webinar are sort of saying half or less, which possibly is what they're really experiencing, or maybe they're just not mandating POs as strictly.
Maybe that's those exclusions. There you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on that, guys?
I would say, from my experience, I would say probably around 80, probably under 80. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys. That was really quite useful. So as I said, that's really the end of our webinar. I did say, if you have some time or had any questions, feel free to submit. I see one question did come through, which I'll quickly put to the audience. I know we've run out of time, so if you need to drop off, feel free, but do not just extend it by a couple of minutes to just answer this one question that I can see here. And the question is probably directed to you, Troy, seeing that it was on the back of your side of the presentation. If integration is not synchronization, what are you recommending organizations should do in the P2P process?
Yeah, so I think really you need to understand, ask the question. So typically vendors are throwing around, software vendors are throwing around this word of integration, latches on to finance executives, for example, and they think it's all okay. So just maybe just getting an understanding of how the systems operate. Are they truly integrated? Understand where your data is actually sitting. So do we have a separate master file in our ERP? Of course, we have one in ERP, but do we have a separate one inside our procurement system? Even if you're running SAP and you have Ariba, the data is sitting in two separate places. So even though Ariba is owned by SAP, it wasn't developed by SAP, it was acquired. So the data is still sitting in two separate places. So you just need to understand where your data is sitting. And you need to put the only way really to make sure it's right is to test the data. You need to, whether it's a once-off, first initially, then once-off test the data. Like the example we showed, do a once-off and then understand, do you have a problem? Almost guaranteed there will be a problem. And then you need to put a process in place to continually monitor those master files to make sure they're in sync and it's as often as possible. We have our customers doing it every single day. So if there's something falls out of synchronization, you'll know the next day. And it's not just it could be across a number of systems. It doesn't need to be just procurement. It could be across, there's master file information sitting in buckets all around your organization. And it's not stored, it's not one version of the truth. So you really need to put a process in place to check it.
Right, yeah, okay. Terrific, thanks. I think we run out of time. There's a couple of questions about will we make the presentation available to you? Absolutely, I should have mentioned up front, post this, we'll send you a link to the recording if you want to share it with other colleagues. And actually, I think we'll also have a little survey. We'd really love you guys to just give us a bit of feedback on this webinar and anything else that you might want to see in the future. Wendy, I see an email or message from you around sharing this with the Corruption Prevention Network. Thank you. We will certainly take you up on that offer. Thank you. And with that, I just wanted to close off and just say thanks to you guys for your time and the participation. Thanks for the questions and the poll. We'll be doing more of these during the year, so looking forward to seeing you on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you.